I am Lily. I am here to share my love experiences with you, so find a quiet place and listen. When my grandmother passed away, I inherited her old countryside house, a two-story relic nestled in a sleepy village wrapped in vines and silence. It was the kind of place that smelled like old books and dried lavender, with floors that creaked as if whispering secrets. I moved in one warm August morning, seeking quiet after the chaos of a city life I no longer wanted. The house held memories I barely recalled. I used to visit during summers as a child, but those were now flashes, tea with too much sugar, sunflowers in the backyard, and the way Gran hummed while she baked. The attic was the last place I planned to explore, but on my third night, I couldn't sleep. Something about the wind brushing against the windows made me curious. I took a flashlight, pulled the chain that released the stairs, and climbed up. Dust hung in the air like mist. The space was cluttered with boxes, old furniture, and trunks draped in white sheets. I started poking around, not expecting anything special, until I opened a wooden chest tucked behind a rocking chair. Inside, wrapped in a faded silk scarf, was a bundle of letters tied with twine. They were addressed to a man named Thomas Everly. The handwriting was delicate, unmistakably my grandmother's. None of them were dated or posted. I flipped through them, reading lines that made my heart clench. I still remember the way you said goodbye, like it was a promise we were both afraid to keep. If this letter ever reaches you, know that I never stopped wondering what could have been. I sat there for hours, reading letter after letter. They weren't just confessions, they were whole chapters of a love story I'd never known. Gran had never mentioned a Thomas. She'd lived a quiet life, widowed early after my grandfather passed away. But these letters weren't meant for him. Curiosity gripped me like a fever. Who was Thomas Everly? Why did she never send the letters? Why hide them? The next day, I brought the letters downstairs, made myself some tea, and began investigating. I started with the village library's local archive section. I found a small mention of a Thomas Everly who had lived here in the 1950s, just before Gran married my grandfather. With the help of the librarian, an old woman named Margaret who remembered everything, I learned that Thomas had been a traveling photographer. He and my grandmother had been seen around town more than once, Margaret said with a knowing smirk. They were something, she added. But he left. Disappeared. Some said it was for war, some said it was heartbreak. No one really knew. I felt like I was living inside a storybook. Every lead pulled me deeper into the romance Gran had buried. A week later, I found an address in the corner of one of the envelopes. Faded but legible, Rosegate Retirement Home, Devonshire. I had no idea how long ago that was written, or if Thomas was still alive. But I had to try. I drove to Devonshire on a rainy Thursday morning, hands trembling on the wheel. The home was a soft-colored building tucked behind a garden, roses blooming despite the drizzle. I asked for Thomas Everly at the front desk, expecting them to shake their heads and say he'd passed years ago. But they didn't. He was alive. 91 years old. Frail but sharp, they said. I was led to a small room with a large window overlooking the hills. A man sat in a chair by the window, wearing a beige cardigan and holding a worn-out photo album. His silver hair was combed neatly, and his eyes, though tired, still held a spark. "Mr. Everly?" I asked. He looked up slowly, blinking at me. "Yes?" I stepped closer. "My name is Lily. Lily Hart. I think you knew my grandmother." "Eleanor Hart." His eyes lit up like someone had turned on a forgotten lamp inside him. "Eleanor," he whispered, voice trembling. "Little Ella." Tears stung my eyes. "She passed away 2 months ago. I found these in her attic." I handed him the bundle of letters. He held them like something sacred. He didn't open them, not right away. Instead, he closed his eyes and whispered, "She never sent them." "I don't think she could," I said softly. "I think she was afraid." "I was too," he murmured. "We were young. I left for Paris, thinking I'd make something of myself. She married before I came back. She always remembered you, I said. Even if she never said it out loud. He looked at me for a long time, and for a moment I felt like I was staring into my grandmother's past, the man she might have loved until her last breath. I stayed that afternoon. We drank tea and talked. He told me stories of how he and Gran would sneak off to the lake, how she once convinced him to dance in the rain outside the bakery. He spoke of her like she was still alive, right there beside us. Over the next few months, I visited often. Thomas grew weaker, but his spirit burned bright every time I walked in with a new letter. We'd read one together, cry, and then laugh at something my grandmother had written. Her wit was sharp even in ink. And somewhere in those visits, I met Alpha, Thomas's grandson. He was warm, thoughtful, and had the kind of smile that felt like a warm blanket. At first, we just talked about our grandparents. Then we started meeting for walks. Then coffee. Then dinners. One evening, as we sat by the lake not far from Gran's house, I realized I was falling for him. I guess our grandparents had unfinished business, he said. Maybe, I smiled. But maybe it wasn't meant to be their story. Maybe it's ours. Thomas passed away peacefully one winter morning, with the final letter clutched in his hands. We buried him beside the lake, per his wishes. As for me, I stayed in my grandmother's house. Alpha moved in months later. We planted sunflowers in the garden, just like Gran used to, and sometimes, when the wind is just right, I swear I can hear music in the trees. Gran never got to send her letters. But I got to live the love story she never could. Our first date wasn't what I expected. It wasn't candlelight or jazz music or a perfectly planned dinner. It was rain, 2 muddy boots, and a broken-down car. We hadn't called it a date at first. Alpha had been helping me sort through some of Thomas's belongings, photos, old negatives, travel journals, things too precious to throw away. He mentioned an old hiking trail near the ridge where his grandfather once proposed to someone who wasn't my grandmother. We both laughed at how tangled love stories could be. Want to see it? He asked casually. It's not a long walk. I said yes before even thinking. Maybe because I liked the way he smiled when he talked about nature. Maybe because I wanted to see who Alpha was when the world around him wasn't framed by grief. We packed light, sandwiches, tea in thermoses, and a blanket just in case. I wore my grandmother's wool sweater, the one with the fraying sleeves. And he showed up in an olive green jacket that looked like it had stories of its own. We hiked in silence for a while, letting the crunch of leaves and the wind fill the space between us. It wasn't awkward. It was calm. Like we didn't need to impress each other. Like we already knew something unspoken. The trail opened up to a cliffside with a view that felt like stepping into a painting. Rolling hills, a river cutting through the valley, and the sky heavy with clouds. We laid the blanket down, ate our sandwiches, and shared sips of lukewarm tea. I used to come here when things felt too heavy, Alpha said, looking out over the trees. It helped me think. Did you ever bring someone here before? I asked, then regretted how forward it sounded. He turned to me and smiled gently. No. Just you. I looked away, my face warm. Good answer. That was the moment I realized I was in trouble. On our way back, the sky opened up. Rain poured without warning, drenching us in seconds. We ran, laughing like fools, slipping and sliding through the mud until we made it back to his car, which, of course, wouldn't start. He cursed under his breath and banged the steering wheel while I sat in the passenger seat, soaked and shivering. Well, he said with a sheepish grin, not quite the romantic evening I had in mind. I turned to him, water dripping from my hair, and said, "Are you kidding? This is the most romantic evening I've had in years." He blinked, surprised. Really? I nodded. It's real. It's messy. It's perfect. There was a beat of silence. The kind that stretches between two people who suddenly realize the air has changed. He leaned in slowly, so slowly that I could have backed away if I wanted to. But I didn't. His lips were warm, gentle, unsure. Mine were probably freezing, but he didn't seem to care. The kiss wasn't cinematic or dramatic. It was simple. Honest. The kind of kiss that says, I want to know who you are, one page at a time. When he pulled back, we both laughed nervously. Was that okay? He asked, his voice low. More than okay, I whispered. Eventually, a kind farmer passing by gave us a jump start. We drove back in silence, hands touching lightly on the center console. My heart was louder than the rain on the windshield. When he dropped me off at Grant's house, he didn't ask to come in. He just walked me to the porch, looked me in the eyes, and said, I'd like to do this again, minus the broken car. I'd like that too, I said. As I watched his taillights disappear into the night, I realized something simple but powerful. Love doesn't always arrive dressed in perfection. Sometimes, it shows up soaked in rainwater and hope. It took 2 weeks before we planned the second date. Not because we didn't want to see each other, but because life, as it often does, got in the way. I was sorting through estate papers, repairing broken windows, and trying not to drown in loneliness. Alpha had work, his own grieving process, and a father in the hospital with blood pressure problems. We texted. We talked on the phone. But it wasn't until he called one Thursday evening and said, I need fresh air and your face, that we set a plan. This time, it was dinner. Nothing fancy. Just a quiet local restaurant with old wooden booths, soft jazz playing through the speakers, and a menu that hadn't changed in 20 years. The kind of place where locals don't bother with reservations. I wore a simple black dress and pulled my hair back. He showed up in jeans and a navy blue shirt, freshly shaven, but still very much himself, comfortable, a little wrinkled, warm-eyed. You look beautiful, he said when I opened the door. You're late, I teased. He grinned. I panicked over socks. Dinner started perfectly. We shared a bottle of red wine. Talked about travel, places we hadn't been but wanted to go. I told him about a book I wanted to write. He told me he once tried stand-up comedy in college and bombed so badly he considered becoming a monk. We laughed. We touched hands across the table. For a while, it felt easy again. But then the conversation shifted. He asked about my ex. It wasn't accusatory, just curious. But I froze. He was complicated, I said, carefully. Alpha nodded. You don't have to talk about it. But I did. And I didn't. Because the truth was, I hadn't really unpacked that part of myself yet. The part that had once given everything to someone who didn't know how to stay. The part that still flinched at certain words. The part that wasn't sure it deserved to be loved without caution. Instead, I said, let's just say I've learned to read red flags in high definition. Alpha leaned back, his face unreadable. Is that what this is? A red flag? My chest tightened. No. I just don't want to rush. I'm not asking you to. I nodded, but the air had shifted. I could feel it in the silence between our words, in the way he suddenly stirred his drink like he needed something to do with his hands. After dinner, we took a walk. The streets were quiet. The air smelled like cinnamon and old pavement. I kept my arms crossed, not because I was cold, but because something inside me was curling in on itself. He noticed. You're somewhere else, he said gently. I'm trying not to be. Don't try. Just, be honest. So I stopped walking and turned to face him. I'm scared. He blinked, startled. Of me? No. Of this. Of how much I want it to work. Of how good you are. Of how much I already like you. His eyes softened. I've rushed into things before, I went on. Chased after stories that weren't mine. I don't want to lose myself again. Alpha stepped closer, not touching me yet, just close enough that I could feel his warmth. Then let's take our time, he said. Let's build something slow. Something that lasts. I exhaled like I'd been holding my breath since the salad course. He reached for my hand. This time, I didn't flinch. I let him hold it, fingers entwined. We stood there for a while in the middle of the sidewalk, under a broken street lamp that flickered like an old movie reel. No kiss that night. No dramatic ending. Just a promise made in quietness. We would move forward, slowly, deliberately, and together. Falling for Alpha didn't happen all at once. It happened in pieces. Like the way he always opened jars for me without making a comment, or how he remembered I hated olives and picked them off his plate too. Or the time I told him I felt anxious in crowded places, and instead of saying, "You'll be fine," he said, "Then we don't go." Simple. It was in the details. One Sunday afternoon, he came over with groceries, not flashy things, but thoughtful ones, my favorite yogurt, the herbal tea I mentioned once, a new bulb for the porch light that had gone out. No occasion. No explanation. "Did you just do my entire shopping list from memory?" I asked, half laughing, half swooning. He shrugged like it was nothing. "You said you were tired this week. I figured I'd save you the trip." I leaned against the counter, watching him unpack, wondering how I'd gotten so lucky. And then immediately wondering how long I'd get to keep him. Because here's the honest part, even as our relationship grew, so did the fear. I wasn't used to someone being this consistent. This patient. He didn't push when I got quiet. He didn't withdraw when I needed space. He didn't flinch when I shared the messier parts of my past, the nights I cried myself to sleep, the years I spent shrinking for someone else's comfort. Instead, he stayed. One evening, we sat in the garden. The sun was setting, casting golden stripes across the grass. I was pulling weeds from between the sunflowers while he read a book, one leg stretched out, the other bent. "I'm falling in love with you," I said, barely above a whisper. Not rehearsed. Not planned. He closed the book slowly. Looked at me. Didn't smile, not yet. "That scares you, doesn't it?" he asked. I nodded, hand still buried in soil. He set the book down and joined me on the grass. Took the gardening glove off my hand and laced his fingers with mine, mud and all. "I'm not here to be perfect," he said. "I'm just here. With you. For all of it." I didn't cry then, but I wanted to. Not because I was sad. But because my heart didn't know what to do with something so safe. So sincere. After that, we didn't label things. We just lived. He taught me how to slow down. I taught him how to cook without setting off the smoke alarm. He played me old songs his grandfather used to love. I showed him how my grandmother used to leave little notes inside books. Sometimes we fought, about little things like who forgot to lock the door, or which way the toilet paper should roll. But even then, there was a softness in how we came back together. No raised voices. No slammed doors. Just time, space, and the quiet choosing of each other again and again. Our love didn't burn like wildfire. It grew like the garden we tended side by side, planted with care, watered with honesty, rooted in mutual respect. And one night, as we lay in bed, legs tangled and laughter still lingering from some dumb joke he made, he kissed my forehead and said, "I never thought love would feel like peace." Neither did I. But now that I had it, I knew. This, he, was home. We lay there for a while, not talking. Just breathing in sync. His arm was under my neck, his thumb gently tracing the curve of my shoulder. The room smelled like lavender and warm cotton, and the rain outside had slowed to a whisper against the window pane. "I never thought love would feel like peace," he had just said. I turned slightly, resting my hand against his chest. "What did you think it would feel like?" He was quiet for a moment, and then said, "Like fire. Like chaos. Like obsession." I thought that's what love meant, passion that burns everything else away. I nodded. I had thought that once too. "And now?" I asked. "Now, he echoed, brushing his lips across my temple. Now it feels like exhaling after holding my breath for years. I didn't say anything right away. I just listened, to the rhythm of his heart, to the stillness that wrapped around us like a second blanket. Then, softly, I asked, "Do you think we're ready? For this? For everything that comes with love that lasts?" He didn't answer immediately. I appreciated that about him, he never rushed the truth. "I don't think love comes with a checklist," he said. "But I think we've started something worth continuing. And I'm not afraid of the work." I tilted my head, looking up at him. "Even when I overthink everything? Even when I shut down and go quiet?" "Especially then," he said, without hesitation. "That's when I want to stay the most." I swallowed hard. "You don't want perfect?" "No," he said. "I want honest. I want messy and real and present. I want you." I pressed my face into his chest to hide how much that cracked me open. "You're really not going anywhere, are you?" I mumbled. "No," he said, kissing the top of my head. "But I'll walk beside you, never ahead. You set the pace." I smiled into his shirt, tears threatening but not falling. The lamp on my nightstand was still on, casting a soft amber light across the room. He reached over to turn it off, but I stopped him. "Wait," I whispered. "One more thing. Anything." I lifted my head and looked at him, really looked. Into the depth of those quiet, steady eyes. "I think I'm falling in love with you too," I said. His expression didn't change, not dramatically. He didn't gasp or grin. He just softened. "Then we're in the same place," he said, brushing a strand of hair from my cheek. "And I really like this place." He turned off the light, and the room fell into darkness. But inside, I had never felt more seen. More understanding. More held. We didn't need more words that night. Just the silence that followed, a silence that felt like trust, like warmth, like two people finally finding rest in each other. I woke up to the smell of coffee. Soft light was seeping in through the curtains, casting long lines across the wooden floor. The room was quiet, except for the distant sound of a kettle whistling and the occasional clink of something in the kitchen. My body was still warm from where he had slept beside me, but the space next to me was empty now, his side of the bed gently indented, like a lingering presence. I pulled on one of his old shirts he'd left over weeks ago, faded gray, too big on me, and padded barefoot down the hallway. My legs still felt like clouds. Alpha was standing by the stove, hair tousled, barefoot, wearing yesterday's jeans and nothing else. He was humming softly, stirring something in a small pan. I stood in the doorway and just watched him for a second. It was the kind of moment you don't realize is important until years later. Ordinary, but not. He noticed me before I said anything. He always did. "Morning," he said, that soft, low voice of his still scratchy from sleep. "You snore, by the way." I gasped dramatically. "Lies. I have proof." "What kind?" He held up a muffin tin. "I baked." "That means I get to make baseless accusations." I walked over, leaned up to kiss his cheek, and murmured, "This counts as blackmail." He looked down at me with that quiet smile I was already growing addicted to. "Then I'll keep baking." We ate breakfast at the kitchen table, muffins, scrambled eggs, and way too much butter. I didn't realize how hungry I was until the first bite. Something about him made everything taste better. "You slept well?" he asked, watching me from across the table. I nodded. "Really well. I don't usually sleep with someone else in the bed." "Too hot? Too vulnerable?" He didn't look away. "You didn't seem afraid last night." "I wasn't," I said. "That's the weird part." He leaned forward, resting his forearms on the table. "You know what I realized?" "What?" "We met because of a box of unsent love letters." I smiled softly. "And now we're writing our own." He paused for a beat, then added, "Do you ever think, maybe we were supposed to find each other through them? Like your grandmother left them there for a reason?" I thought about that a lot. About how the past quietly guides us, even when it doesn't speak out loud. "Maybe," I said. "Or maybe we were just lucky." I like both versions. So did I. After breakfast, he helped me water the sunflowers. We didn't talk much, just moved in rhythm. The way people do when they're starting to understand each other's silences. At one point, I caught him looking at me with that same look he gave me the first night we kissed, soft and full of questions he wasn't asking yet. "What?" I asked, wiping a bit of dirt on my cheek with the back of my hand. "Nothing," he said. "Just, you. Here. Us. This." He didn't need to explain. I felt it too. There wasn't a name for what we were yet. Not officially. But it was forming, slowly, naturally. Not as a label, but as a space. A space we were both growing into. And for the first time in a very long time, I wasn't afraid of where it might lead. Because that morning wasn't just a morning. It was the beginning of something steady. Something honest. Something of ours. It was a Tuesday evening. One of those still, early autumn nights where the wind smelled like distant bonfires and the air felt like a sweater you didn't need yet, but wore anyway. We were sitting on the porch, him on the swing, me curled up in the chair with a mug of chamomile tea. The lantern above us buzzed with the occasional moth. Everything was quiet except for the creaking of the swing and the soft sounds of crickets filling the space between us. He took a long sip of his coffee, then set it down slowly on the side table. "Can I ask you something?" he said, his voice low but serious. "You always can," I said, setting my mug down too. He turned toward me slightly. "Where do you think this is going? You and me?" I didn't answer right away. Not because I didn't have thoughts, but because I had too many. "That's a big question," I said carefully. "I know," he replied. "I'm not asking for a roadmap. I'm just wondering if we're walking in the same direction." I looked out at the dark horizon. The garden was barely visible, but I could still see the outline of the sunflowers, swaying like silent witnesses. "Can I tell you what scares me about that question?" I asked. He nodded. "Emma, my closest friend, she dated a guy for 3 years," I said. They had plans. Wedding boards, apartment leases, even baby names. And then one day, he said he wasn't sure anymore. Just like that. Like all those years had been a maybe. Alpha didn't speak. He just listened. "She told me," I continued, "Lily, the worst part wasn't the breakup. It was realizing I built a life around someone who never planned to stay." He let that settle between us. "I think I'm afraid of planning too far ahead," I admitted. "I like where we are. And I think I like where it could go. But I don't want to build castles in the sky." He nodded slowly. "Yeah. I get that." I looked at him. "What about you? What's your answer to your own question?" He leaned back on the swing, rocking gently. "You know my friend Jonah? The one who builds guitars?" "Yeah. He was in love once, deep, honest, terrifying love. He and his partner used to talk about growing old together. But she wanted to move to another country. Start a whole new life. He didn't. Neither one of them was wrong. They just weren't meant to last. It wrecked him." "What did he say about it?" Alpha smiled faintly. "He told me, don't date someone's potential. Date their present. If you can't love who they are right now, don't hope for who they might become." I let that sink in. "That's a good line," I said. "Yeah," Alpha replied. "But it makes things scary too. Because if I do love who you are now, it means this already matters." I looked down at my hands in my lap. "It matters to me too." We sat there for a long time after that. Not quite holding hands, but not letting go either. It was the kind of pause that didn't need filling. There was no conclusion. No final decision. No label spoken or expectation set. Just two people, sitting on a porch in the fading light, sharing fears, sharing borrowed wisdom, and slowly beginning to trust that maybe, just maybe, they'd find their own story between all the ones they'd been told. It was the kind of night made for unraveling. The power had flickered out from a storm earlier in the evening. The rain had since stopped, but the house still echoed with its memory. We lit candles in the living room, 4 of them, one on each windowsill, and sat on the couch, wrapped in one big blanket, our feet tucked beneath us. I was reading one of my grandmother's old poetry books aloud, half laughing at how dramatic the lines were, when Alpha suddenly went quiet. I closed the book gently and looked over at him. "You okay?" He nodded. But the way he was staring into the candlelight said something else. "What's on your mind?" He hesitated. Then, slowly, he said, "There's something I've never really told anyone. At least not the whole thing." I gave him space, not crowding him with questions or comfort. Just waiting. "My brother," he began, voice low. His name was Caleb. He was 2 years older than me. Everything I ever wanted to be. He was funny. Smart. Brave in a way I still don't understand. I stayed still, listening. "We were close growing up," he continued. "But when he turned 20, things started changing. He got quieter. Angrier. Like life was suddenly too heavy for him to carry, and he didn't know how to tell anyone." He paused, jaw tightening slightly. I reached for his hand beneath the blanket. He took his own life 2 weeks after his 23rd birthday. My heart dropped. My fingers instinctively curled around his. "I'm so sorry," I whispered. He nodded but didn't look at me. He was still somewhere in that memory. "For a long time I hated him for it," he said quietly. "And then I hated myself for hating him. Grief's weird like that. It keeps changing shape. Some days I still hear his laugh in my head. Some days I can't even remember his voice, and that scares me more than anything." I didn't speak. I just let the silence wrap around us like the blanket we shared. He continued, slower now. "I think that's why I keep people at a distance. Not because I want to. But because I know how fast things can disappear. And how much it hurts when they do." When he finally looked at me, there was no defense in his eyes. Just a quiet kind of naked truth. A soft ache. I reached up and touched his face gently. "Thank you for telling me. I didn't know if I should." "You didn't have to. But you did. And that means something." He leaned into my touch, closing his eyes for a moment. "You don't have to carry it alone, you know," I said. "Some days I forget that." "Well," I said softly, "I'll remind you." He opened his eyes again, and this time, there was something new in them. Not just affection. Not just attraction. But something deeper. Trust. Fragility. The flicker of safety. "I think this is the first time I've talked about him without breaking down," he said. I smiled gently. "Maybe it's the candlelight. Or maybe it's me. It's definitely you." We didn't say anything else that night. We just sat in the dim light, my head on his shoulder, his fingers wrapped in mine, the storm outside long gone, but something inside us freshly cleared. He had trusted me with a piece of his past. And in doing so, we had opened a door that only opens when someone stops pretending they're unbreakable. That was the night I didn't just like Alpha. That was the night I understood him. We didn't move for a long time after Alpha told me about his brother. We just sat together in candlelight, both of us quietly holding the weight of everything that had been said. My hand was still wrapped in his, and for the first time, I realized how natural it felt, not romantic, not dramatic, just safe. At some point, I exhaled and whispered, "Can I tell you something too?" He turned his head slightly toward me, his expression unreadable but patient. "Of course." I hesitated. The words lived somewhere in my chest, buried deep, like old glass tucked into the dirt. Sharp. Glittering. Dangerous to touch. My mother left when I was 8, I said. She said she needed space. I didn't know what that meant at the time. I just remember her packing a red suitcase and promising she'd call. I stared at the candle nearest us. Its flame trembled slightly in the breeze from the cracked window. She never did. Not once. No birthday cards. No letters. Just silence. Like I never existed. Alpha didn't interrupt. He just listened, really listened. My dad tried. He really did. But he was always working. He didn't know how to deal with a girl growing up with no mother. So, I grew up fast. Too fast. I swallowed hard, then continued. I remember once, in high school, I told a friend I didn't believe in love. She laughed and said I was too romantic not to. But the truth was, love scared the hell out of me. Because if the person who's supposed to love you unconditionally can just walk away, what's stopping anyone else? Alpha looked at me then, his eyes holding something steady. Something grounding. That's why I keep people at arm's length, I admitted. Even when I don't want to. Even when I desperately want to be close. His thumb moved over my knuckles, gentle and slow. I didn't know how much I still carried that until you started staying longer. Until you started making the silence feel full instead of empty. I looked down, suddenly embarrassed. Sorry. That's a lot. He shook his head. Don't ever apologize for giving someone the truth. I blinked back the sting in my eyes. Thank you for telling me, he added, echoing my words from earlier. I gave him a small smile. I guess we're just two slightly bruised people trying not to bleed on each other. Alpha leaned his forehead against mine, his voice almost a breath. Or maybe we're two people who finally stopped pretending we're fine. We sat like that, forehead to forehead, candlelight flickering between us, hearts cracked open but not broken. He didn't try to fix anything. I didn't try to be less complicated. We just existed, two humans with stories, with scars, with hope still beating under the damage. That night, no declarations were made. But something shifted. Not in fireworks or grand gestures. But in the stillness of shared truth. In the choice to stay. In the understanding that maybe, just maybe, we were already building something real. After I spoke, neither of us said anything for a while. We just sat there, still beneath the blanket, still surrounded by the glow of candles and the sound of the wind outside gently brushing the windows. But inside, everything had shifted. Not dramatically, but undeniably. Like two tectonic plates finally settling into place. I didn't look at him at first. I kept my eyes on my hands. On the way they trembled slightly in my lap. I wasn't afraid, just raw. Like I had taken off my armor and didn't know how to move without it yet. Then I felt his fingers brush my chin, gently tilting my face toward his. When our eyes met, I didn't see pity. I didn't see shock. I didn't even see sadness. I saw recognition. Like he had been carrying something heavy, and now realized I had been too. Maybe in different shapes. Maybe for different reasons. But the weight? It was the same. You're brave, he said, so softly I almost didn't hear it. I shook my head. I'm just tired of pretending I'm not human. That's what bravery is, he said. Telling the truth even when it hurts to say it out loud. I looked at him for a long time after that. And he looked back, really looked, like he was memorizing me. Not the version of me I showed the world. Not the well-put-together girl who always had the right words. But me, as I was in that moment, unguarded, a little shaky, a little tear-streaked, and entirely real. His hand moved to my cheek. Warm. Reassuring. Then he said, "You know what I'm thinking?" I gave a small smile. "That you wish you'd brought ice cream?" He laughed softly. "Okay, yeah. A little. But also, I'm thinking, I've never felt this close to someone without kissing them. That made my heart stutter. Not in a romantic fantasy kind of way, but in that real, gut-deep way where you feel everything shift in your chest at once. You don't have to kiss me, I whispered. What we're doing, it's enough. I know, he said. And that's why I want to. We didn't. Not yet. Instead, we sat in that fragile, perfect quiet. Our eyes spoke more than mouths ever could. We didn't rush the moment. We didn't try to wrap it in a bow. We just sat, letting the truth breathe between us. Later, when the candles burned low and the silence had softened into comfort, he pulled me a little closer, and I rested my head against his shoulder. He sighed gently. Feels like we took a step tonight. We did, I whispered. Not sure where it leads, he said. Me neither, I replied. But I'm not scared of the next one. And in the flicker of that candlelit stillness, something unspoken passed between us. Not love. Not yet. But something like it. The beginning of belief. The beginning of maybe. It started over something small. Almost ridiculous, looking back. I had been reorganizing the bookshelves in the living room. The ones that were still filled with my grandmother's old paperbacks, romances, history, poetry, even some obscure gardening guides she never actually read. I had a system in mind, fiction by author, non-fiction by theme. It gave me a sense of control, a strange comfort in shaping this little world inside the house I was still growing into. Alpha came by that afternoon, carrying 2 coffees and a bag of almond croissants. Smells like effort in here, he teased as he stepped inside, nose wrinkling at the faint scent of lemon polish. More like dust and obsessive categorization, I smiled, brushing my hands off on my jeans. He set the food down and walked over to the shelves, I scanning the titles. Where's the little red book that used to sit on top? The one with the gold spine? I paused. You mean the poetry one? Yeah. That one. It was her favorite, right? I think so. Why? It's not here. I frowned. I must have moved it. He pulled back slightly. You moved it? Well, yeah. I didn't throw it out or anything, if that's what you're asking. He didn't say anything at first. Just stood there, still looking at the space where the book had been. I tried to laugh it off. Don't tell me you were emotionally attached to my grandmother's book placement. He didn't laugh. I just think some things don't need changing. Especially things that meant something. I blinked. It's just a book, Alpha. To you, maybe, he said. But to her, it was part of her story. And you talk about honoring her memory, so how is rewriting her space honoring her? The words stung more than I expected. I crossed my arms. I'm not rewriting anything. I live here now. I've cleaned every room, cried in most of them, and spent hours sorting through her things. I'm allowed to shape it into something that also feels like mine. I never said you weren't, he replied, more gently. But there's a difference between making space and erasing history. I took a step back. So now I'm erasing her? That's not what I said. No, but it's what you implied. There was a long, heavy pause. The kind that makes you suddenly aware of your heartbeat. He ran a hand through his hair and exhaled. Look. I'm sorry. That was unfair. I didn't mean it like that. I nodded, but my throat was tight. He looked at me, his expression softer now, uncertain. I loved the way she kept things. It felt intentional. Like every book had a memory attached. I swallowed. You were closer to her than I ever got to be. You probably know her better than I do. That's not true. It feels like it. Another pause. We both stood there, trying to figure out what had just happened. How a missing book had unraveled something unspoken between us. Then he stepped closer, not in anger, not to prove a point, but like someone offering a branch across a river. "Lily," he said gently. "I didn't come here to fight you. I miss her too. In my own way." I looked up at him, eyes glassy. Sometimes it feels like I'm carrying the memory of someone I barely had time to know. Like I'm trying to make sense of someone who's everywhere in this house and nowhere in my heart. He blinked, like he hadn't expected that. And maybe I hadn't either. "And when you come in and know the names of her books, and how she arranged them, and the exact place she kept a red poetry book, sometimes it makes me feel like a stranger in my own story." That was it. That was the truth beneath it all. His shoulders dropped, and something shifted in his eyes. I didn't realize. I was just holding on to what little I had of her. I nodded slowly. "And I'm trying to build something out of what's left." We stood there, the silence no longer sharp, but softened by understanding. Then he smiled, tired, small, but real. "Okay. How about a compromise?" I raised an eyebrow. "You sure you can survive one?" He laughed. "No promises. But maybe we keep her red poetry book on top. Just that one. You can organize everything else as you like." I bit my lip, trying not to smile. "And if I alphabetize her herbal tea collection next, will you stage an intervention?" "Absolutely," he said, and for the first time since the argument began, we both laughed. He reached for my hand, not as a reward, not as a peace treaty, but simply because he wanted to hold it. And I let him. "I like that we can talk like this," he said quietly. "Even when we don't agree? Especially then. It means we're not pretending." I nodded. "Yeah. It means we care." And we did. That was the first time we had disagreed. The first time our voices rose and our defenses went up. But we didn't break. We didn't walk away. We didn't leave things unspoken. We stayed. And somehow, that mattered more than any romantic gesture ever could. The morning after our first argument, I woke up to find a single yellow rose sitting just outside my door. No note. No text. Just the flower, slightly tilted, morning dew still clinging to its petals. It was the kind of gesture I might have rolled my eyes at once. But now, it felt like exactly what I needed. Quiet. Thoughtful. Not asking for anything. Just there. I smiled, tucked it into a small glass jar on the windowsill, and went to make tea. Half an hour later, I heard his knock. He stood at the door holding a carton of eggs, a bundle of herbs, and a loaf of sourdough bread tucked under his arm like an apology. "I brought breakfast," he said, his smile uncertain. "Or a peace treaty." "Your call." I stepped aside, letting him in. "You could have just said you missed my toaster." "That too." We didn't talk much at first. We just moved around the kitchen like we had done it 100 times before, him slicing herbs, me cracking eggs into a bowl. There was a quiet rhythm between us. One that felt steadying after all that had been said the day before. When we sat down to eat, the silence stretched again, but this time, it was gentle. "So," he finally said, "how's the red book doing in its rightful place of honor?" I rolled my eyes, smiling. "Still judging me from the top shelf." He grinned. "Good. Keeps you humble." We both laughed, and just like that, the air between us felt lighter. After breakfast, we stepped out into the back garden. It was overgrown in places, wild and tangled, just like my memories of this house. Alpha offered to help clear out the corners, trim the roses, maybe plant something new for fall. We worked side by side for hours, him pulling weeds with stubborn determination, me brushing dirt off my knees and pretending I knew what I was doing. There were moments of laughter, a few playful jabs about my dramatic gardening gloves, and the occasional silence that felt more like harmony than absence. At some point, I sat back on the grass and just watched him work, sunlight brushing his shoulders, a soft crease of focus between his brows. He looked up and caught me staring. "What?" he asked, amused. I shook my head. Nothing. Just, I'm glad you're here. He stood, brushing soil from his palms, then sat beside me. Me too. We sat like that for a while, dirt-stained and tired, but somehow more at ease than ever before. I've never had this before, I said quietly. He glanced over. What do you mean? A disagreement that didn't end with walls going up. Or someone walking away. You stayed. We both did. He nodded slowly. It's new for me too. I guess that's the point, I added. Not that we never argue. But we trust each other enough to come back after. He looked at me then, not like someone trying to figure me out, but like someone who already had and liked what he saw anyway. I'm not going anywhere, Lily. My chest ached in that beautiful, terrifying way that meant I was falling, and probably already had. I didn't say anything back. I didn't need to. Instead, I rested my head against his shoulder. And in that moment, surrounded by half-trimmed hedges and the scent of rosemary on his skin, I knew something had changed. We were still figuring it all out, still new, still cautious. But now, there was something deeper between us. Something real. Something earned. A few days later, Alpha invited me to a small get-together with a few of his friends from college. Nothing big, just wine, music, and that easy kind of laughter that happens when people feel safe enough to drop the masks. It was the first time I'd seen him in a different light, relaxed, teasing, arms slung across the back of a chair while he told some story about an old road trip that ended with a flat tire and a goat somehow involved. He made people feel at ease. He made me feel that way too. But somewhere between the fourth glass of wine and the moment someone asked, "So, are you two like, a thing?" I felt my chest tighten. Alpha looked at me. I looked at him. And we both smiled, soft, unsure. The kind of smile people give when they're caught between the truth they feel and the words they don't yet know how to say. Later that night, after everyone had gone home, we sat in the quiet of his living room. The mood had shifted. It wasn't heavy. Just, there. Like a pause that lingered too long. He leaned forward, resting his elbows on his knees. Can I ask you something? Of course, I said, though I already felt the question forming before he spoke it. What are we doing? I swallowed. I don't know. I was hoping you'd figured it out. He let out a breath, half laugh, half sigh. It's not that I don't want to define it. I just don't want to break whatever this is by labeling it too soon. Yeah, I said quietly. It's fragile. But also kind of strong, isn't it? He looked at me like I'd said something true and terrifying all at once. That's exactly how it feels. I tucked my knees under me, pulling the blanket tighter. Do you think we're heading somewhere? Or just circling something we're afraid to land on? I honestly don't know, he admitted. And for once, that didn't scare me. Because I didn't know either. But still, it mattered. We sat in silence after that. Not awkward silence. Not the kind that begged to be filled. Just the kind that exists between two people standing at the edge of something they might fall into, but haven't quite jumped. I looked over at him, watching the way the lamplight brushed the edge of his face. Can I tell you something? Always. I like this. You and me. Even in the not knowing. He smiled. Me too. And that was it. We didn't kiss. We didn't make promises. We didn't draw a map. We just sat there. Side by side. Two people not quite in love, not quite strangers, still trying to understand what it meant to choose each other in a world full of maybes. And outside, the night stretched long and quiet. No answers. No endings. Just the beginning of a question neither of us could quite finish. What are we becoming? And outside, the night stretched long and quiet. No answers. No endings. Just the beginning of a question neither of us could quite finish. And now I find myself wondering. What do you call something that matters but hasn't been named yet? Can two people grow into something more while still holding space for uncertainty? How do you know when to define something, and when to let it unfold? Is love supposed to be clear from the start, or is it something you build, moment by moment? And if we're both unsure, but we're still here, doesn't that mean something? Maybe we don't need to have the answers yet. But I can't help asking. Alpha later gave me a response. Listen to his response in the next story.